the Prime Minister resigned, the Ministry of Interior resigned, the Police President resigned. The former Minister of Interior is not even a parliamentarian. He gave up his mandate in the Slovak Council of the Slovak Republic, and the former police chief is not an advisory of the new Minister of Environment because 2 weeks ago he stepped down. Chairman, I would be very unhappy to perceive this report as politicized, because we are going to vote for it shortly before the election for the European Parliament. I'd like to ask the rapporteur not to put issues that are not guaranteed, that are not valid into this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monica. And Miriam Daly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me to address something from the outset, because if I ever had a doubt that this resolution fits in a partisan political campaign for certain MEPs, then today I remove that doubt completely, because to come here and give the impression that some members of this committee called anyone a traitor is uncalled for and a blatant lie. Now, I would like to focus on this resolution because I read both this resolution discussed today and the Venice Commission report. And let me pick up a few issues which I would like to focus on. Because this resolution is based quite a lot on the recommendations of the Venice Commission. However, at no point did the Venice Commission mention a systematic breach of the rule of law or persistent failure in Malta's legal system, which I feel that this resolution tries to allude to. The Venice Commission recognises the willingness of the Maltese authorities to carry out reforms and welcomes the ambitious law reform programme that the current Maltese government has embarked on. And the move is aimed at reforming laws which were in place for years under different governments, including the whole 25 years of the former Maltese EPP government. However, when you read this resolution, I got the impression that the feeling is that little or nothing is happening in this regard. Now, this resolution lists what measures it wants adopted to achieve good governance, but in the process it disregards the fact that the Venice Commission itself called for a process of public discussion and phasing in of recommendations, and that it is the Venice Commission that acknowledges as well that governance models that work in larger jurisdictions may not always be a good fit for a smaller island. In point 5, this resolution calls for a full and independent public inquiry into the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. First of all, at no point did the government of Malta exclude the holding of such an inquiry. However, holding a public inquiry whilst a magisterial inquiry is ongoing risks prejudicing the latter. And let me give an example. Recently in Malta, the Constitutional Court stated that the right to a fair hearing as safeguarded by the European Convention of Human Rights was breached in the case of a former and a Malta chairman accused of receiving bribery in a heavy fuel oil procurement scandal that goes back to before 2013. The breach amounted to the fact that questions found to lead to the presumption of innocence were asked during a public hearing by the Maltese Public Accounts Committee. And this was an eye-opener. I'm sure that no one wants to prejudice any ongoing criminal investigations which have already resulted in 3 people being charged in court with the commission of the murder. In point 8, this resolution calls for the publication of the full, unredacted report of the magisterial e-grant inquiry. And let me clarify an erroneous point that some members of the monitoring group wanted to push. The e-grant inquiry was conclusive and it confirmed, without room for interpretation, that none of the allegations that the company belonged to the Prime Minister's wife were true. The main conclusions were published and it resulted that the basis for the allegation were forged documents and false signatures. Now, the non-publication of the whole report is in line with the advice of the Attorney General based on the procedures of magisterial inquiries which are followed up by further investigations or prosecutions. And the Prime Minister said from the outset that he wants the inquiry to be published. Point 11 gives the impression that the Maltese authorities never asked for legal assistance from the German Federal Criminal Police Office, which have been handed over Daphne Caruana Galizia's laptop. This is not true. It has been reported that a European investigation order has been sent to the German authorities for this laptop to be handed over. Moreover, this resolution calls on the government, and here I quote, to reform the libel laws being used to frustrate the journalists' works. But it was this current Maltese government that enacted a new Media and Defamation Act, which removed completely the criminal libel that existed in our laws for years. And it is pertinent to note that former Maltese EPP government officials and former Maltese EPP prime ministers instituted such criminal libels against journalists, threatening them with prison. Not to mention a former Maltese EPP minister who threatened a journalist that he will arrest him simply because he was filming a Public Accounts Committee session. If I may, Point 21 ignores Europol's extensive involvement in the Daphne Caruana Galizia murder investigation and the fact that Europol officials have also been appointed by the inquiring magistrate to act as court experts in the inquiry. But in page 7 of the mission report of this monitoring group, it is stated that Europol representatives stressed that so far, and here I quote, Europol has never been closely involved in member states' investigation as with these two cases. But this quote doesn't make it to the resolution. And finally, the resolution gives the impression that compliance issues in the banking sector are particular to Malta. And I have heard about this over and over again, but then very little is said about Germany concerning Deutsche Bank, or about Denmark concerning Danske Bank, or about Estonia and yet again Danske Bank, or the Dutch authorities about ING Bank. I believe that this is the world of two weights, two measures, where the fact that the Maltese authorities take action and cooperate with other FIUs and international institutions is not even considered, but then others are given just a tiny slap on the wrist. I shall stop here, but I feel that we have the unfortunate situation where members of the European Parliament will be asked to vote on a resolution which includes a number of omissions, and which I'm afraid will serve only to alienate people further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I did say at the beginning I wanted colleagues to use this committee opportunity to say what they feel about the report. This may not be completely the case in plenary, so I thank members for doing this. And to continue on the list now, I have Mr. Radev, please.
Благодаря, господин председател.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I would like to express my disagreement with putting Bulgaria in this draft resolution together with Malta and Slovakia. Yes, it is true that the Bulgarian journalist Victoria Marinova was murdered last year. It's a tragedy. I knew her in person. I know her family. But tragic as it is, this murder has nothing to do with her work, and that was proven by the Bulgarian authorities. The DNA tests led to the murderer. He was in Germany, and he was extradited back to Bulgaria. He was intoxicated. He was a